Managing content within a pharmaceutical company can no longer be thought of as managing large volumes of paper documents, as was done in the past. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about electronic content management systems that are used to encourage the upfront development and enforcement of consistent document authoring rules, facilitate single sourcing and reuse, maintain document relationships, implement granular levels of security, incorporate versioning, searching, and workflow, as well as electronic publishing aspects which are part of the FDA's efforts to modernize and streamline regulatory processes which improve the efficiency and accessibility of information. The FDA is faced with mounting pressure to review and approve an increasing amount of drug submission information, to ensure that drugs which are either unsafe or ineffective are kept off of the market, and to ensure that consistent and accurate product information is available to both physicians and end consumers. So given the numerous benefits of electronic submissions, the FDA requires that drug submittals from pharmaceutical companies are submitted to them in an electronic format. As part of the normal course of business, the typical pharmaceutical organization creates, reviews, updates, and publishes a tremendous amount of content. All this content is generated for a reason, whether it's for external review, such as submittals to the FDA, or internal use, such as SOPs. Regardless of its ultimate destination and purpose, this content somehow needs to be properly managed and controlled. In growing pharmaceutical organizations, certain business processes may evolve when a holistic approach is not used. Such business processes can lead to 1. A lack of standardization, such as authors making custom format decisions versus focusing on core information. 2. Different authors recreating the same or very similar information in different documents. And 3. Copying and pasting the same information into different documents, which now has to be stored and maintained in multiple places. As a result, certain key questions must be answered in order to optimize the authoring process. First, what percentage of content is similar? Can common chunks of content be reused? Also, what percentage of content has to be re-entered and subsequently re-reviewed, re-approved, and republished? And finally, are there ever instances where content that is updated in one document requires updates to other documents that contain very similar or associated information? An EDMS, which stands for Electronic Document Management System, is a repository which contains the document files, document file templates, information about the documents such as metadata, document object hierarchy, business rules such as lifecycle information, workflow templates, and definition of users and groups. Users can create multiple versions of the same document by means of checking them out and checking them back in. A version tree consists of all of the document file versions stored as separate objects. The document management system assigns both implicit, which is a version number, and explicit version labels to each version in the version tree. Document files can be searched by both metadata as well as the contents of the file itself. The document management system will provide the user interface that facilitates searching. Users can then view the metadata and/or content of a document depending on their permissions, which is the access level. Finally, these types of systems typically come with features that enable automated rendering, electronic signatures, and a GxP-compliant audit trail. EDMS systems typically incorporate document workflows. A workflow is the representation of a business process whereby the tasks associated with documents follow a specific predefined route from user to user. The two basic workflow types are a serial workflow, where each task can be processed by one user at a time, and the user must complete the task before it progresses to the next user. And a parallel workflow, where multiple tasks within the workflow can be processed at the same time. These workflows are typically leveraged as a means to route documents around as part of review and approval cycles. During review, annotations can be applied to the documents as a way to provide collaborative feedback. Document approvals will include an electronic signature that is legally equivalent to the document approver's handwritten signature. Document authoring templates are put into place in order to determine certain aspects such as margins, fonts, styles, and header and footer content, as well as bookmarking standards. To accomplish this, the organization needs to develop a content strategy where all involved departments understand the ultimate goal and work in solidarity with each other in order to achieve this goal. Understand the current processes being used to create content. Determine what content needs to be created and who creates, reviews, approves, and ultimately uses it. Determine how this content can be broken out into discrete reusable elements or chunks that can be authored once and reused many times in within different documents. Create standard templates for using these content chunks, and develop authoring standards so that the focus for authors is on creating content they are responsible for versus the format. And finally, defining the future business process based on these rules. Preparing for a submission requires a lot of planning and upfront preparation. Some key questions to ask might be, are the publishers ready? Do we have the right number of resources? How much scanned content versus true electronic content do we have in place? Are PDF documents for reports and CRFs already linked and bookmarked? And are we leveraging resources outside of the publishing group? Several key benefits are achieved through proper planning. Well-defined roles such as definition of the overall assembly structure, definition of who is responsible for authoring individual content chunks, and definition of templates for each chunk. This lends itself to reuse and ultimately a consistent and predictable generation of the end published product. (21) CFR Part 11 is a set of regulations from the FDA that govern electronic records and signatures. It establishes criteria for what the FDA considers to be trustworthy and reliable in terms of electronic records and signatures. It also sets requirements for computer system security and validation of GXP processes. What's important to keep in mind is that it's up to the organization to develop, document, and adhere to their own interpretation of these guidelines. These regulations can all be found online. Simply Google search for CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, Title 21, then type in Part 11 under Title 21 Part section. A document lifecycle refers to the status of the content file. Typical examples of these statuses are draft, which is the authoring stage, review, which is the review process, review completed, where the review process is complete, routed for e-signature, which is the signature process, approved, where the signature process is complete, effective, where the document is visible to the user community, and either obsolete or archived, where the document is no longer active but stored for long-term use. Having a status tag to a document is critical, since it allows us to properly categorize the current state of the document that it is in. When security is applied to a document, its status is one of the criteria that is used to determine the visibility and level of the document's access. As discussed in the previous slide, a document status reflects where it's currently at within its life cycle. Additionally, user roles within an EDMS are necessary for two reasons. What system features does the user have access to, and what content does the user have access to? So the EDMS should operate off of role-based security that governs user access based on both the user's role and the document state. Additionally, only certain roles will have the ability to trigger certain events that will change a document state in the EDMS. Different roles within an EDMS system typically mapped to different business functions as shown here. The important thing to keep in mind here is that these systems need to be heavily role-based. For your own system, a roles and permissions matrix can be used to identify each of the key roles in the system and their associated permissions. An electronic submission is a submission of regulatory information and documentation in an electronic format as opposed to traditional paper-based submissions. There are several advantages of electronic submissions. 1. Efficiency. Electronic submissions are processed more efficiently, allowing for quicker review times and faster decision-making. 2. Accessibility. Electronic formats provide easier access to information, allowing regulatory authorities to navigate and review submissions more effectively. 3. Consistency. Standardized electronic formats promote consistency in the presentation of regulatory information, making it easier for both industry and regulatory agencies. 4. Reduced paperwork. Electronic submissions reduce the need for extensive paperwork, making the regulatory process more environmentally friendly and cost-effective. 5. Global acceptance. The use of electronic formats aligns with international standards, facilitating global regulatory harmonization and collaboration. Since electronic submissions are required, the FDA has provided guidance on the submission process, and pharmaceutical companies are expected to adhere to the specified formats and requirements outlined by the agency. A publishing life cycle consists of several stages, which are typically plan, create, review and approve, assemble, publish, and archive. Planning begins with a kickoff meeting where we establish the content hierarchy. Creating is defining what information needs to be authored. Review and approve is where we define who needs to check what was created and also who must approve it. Assemble is when we combine all the different components that need to be linked together. Publishing and distribution generates the final output that will be consumed by the end user. And archiving is where we determine if the content needs to be preserved for long-term storage. An important goal for the FDA is to expedite the submission and approval process for new medical advances on a global basis. The CTD, or Common Technical Document, is part of the ICH's program for developing global guidelines for the content of new drug and biologic product applications. The eCTD is the electronic version of the CTD. It is an electronic format for the submission of regulatory documentation by pharmaceutical companies to the regulatory authorities. An important goal for the FDA is to expedite the submission and approval process for new medical advances on a global basis. So the eCTD was developed by the ICH to be a standard format for submissions to the authorities and agencies responsible for regulation of pharmaceutical products in the USA, Europe, and Japan. Using the eCTD gives pharmaceutical organizations a much greater chance of successfully penetrating worldwide markets more quickly and cost-effectively. The typical goals of a regulatory publishing system which leverages the eCTD is to have a set of electronic templates that can be used to author documents which, once electronically approved, will comprise the leaf notes of the eCTD. An electronic publishing system that is capable of producing eCTDs using the existing EDMS system. A workable business process for building the eCTD submissions using the existing EDMS system. The basic steps involved are create the eCTD structure in the EDMS, assign leaf nodes to the structure which will contain documents, use links to create document cross-references, and leverage a publishing tool that will be used to enable the following: the eCTD structure in an EDMS, what documents are tied to the leaf nodes, the linking between different documents and references to other documents. The job of publishing should be to 1. Export out and create the eCTD backbone, 2. Create the TOCs, bookmarks, and pagination, 3. Create the publication based on the content, And 4, resolve the document cross-references. That's all for this video. For more information about how I can be of value as a business analyst in the pharmaceutical industry, please visit my website at hughesitconsulting.com.